Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to another live stream Own Your Judaism conversation. My name is Moish Steigman, the Mindful Rabbi, and I am excited and honored to introduce my guest for our conversation today, Eliana Light. Eliana envisions a joyful, vibrant, heart-centered Judaism that speaks to the soul and moves the spirit, reminding us that we are all one. She offers professional development to educators, clergy, and lay leaders to elevate and deepen their prayer gatherings, allowing them to offer more meaningful experiences to more people. These days, she creates meaningful learning, prayer, and professional development over Zoom. She is also a sought-after songwriter and performer of catchy, content-rich tunes for all ages and has put out 3 albums of original music. Eliana received her master's in Jewish education from the Davidson School at JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary of America, in 2006 and is based in Durham, North Carolina. Eliana, with all of that, it is also on a personal note that I am so excited to welcome you as well. We have known each other for about 2 weeks of our lives, maybe about 2.5 weeks of our lives. We both worked together I guess 2 summers ago at Ramah Sports Academy. We were both on the Jewish learning staff. We were teaching children, and I imagine I only have a snippet and a snapshot of all the wonders and marvels that you offer, because I got to see it for 2 weeks in a camp environment. I think I can confidently extrapolate it into all the things, and I'm so excited to hear more. But I know the process in many ways is more important than the result, but I'm just going to give a quick result, right? I just remember we're here at camp, and if typical middle school and high schooler fit the generalization, tefillah, prayer, is not usually the number one reason why Jewish kids go to Jewish camps. And that's okay, right? All I know is, like, if we were doing services and we skipped Ashrei with the melody that you did, like, the campers would rebel. They're like, we have to do Ashrei. They had all these tunes. They were going, they were dancing, they were doing all these wonderful things with you. So I just have a real snapshot. And I know we've had some deep conversations about prayer and the Jewish experience. And I'm so excited to learn more and talk more with you today. So welcome, Eliana. Thank you for taking the time to join.
Thank you so much for having me and for having these ongoing conversations and broadcasting them. It's really cool.
Thank you. Thank you. So how have you been? Right? How have you been? We saw each other like a year and a half ago. But how have
I know, even though it's hard to say last summer, because last summer it feels like a blip. It doesn't feel like a summer for so many of us who are used to going to camp in a variety of different ways. So I always have to stop myself. I say oh no, it wasn't last summer. It was 2 summers ago when all of that amazingness happened. I'm doing really well. I feel very lucky that I've continued to have work over the course of the pandemic. I feel lucky to have an apartment that I get to live in, a space I get to have. I moved to Durham only a few years ago. I've really just been here a year and a half because I moved after that summer at camp. Right. Part of why I moved here was because there's a really great airport here and I was traveling to different communities. That reason hasn't been so helpful these days, but it's also beautiful and mostly sunny. It's sunny today, and a lovely Jewish community. So it's been really great to be here. And I think the pandemic has also, for me and for a lot of people, put some things into perspective of what are our values, how are we living, what do we want to be doing in this world when we know that our time is short and our impact can be great.
That's beautiful. I love that. I really want to hear about your journey, because I really want to hear about how you came to make Jewish music and teaching and community building your professional world. But since you brought up since we're talking about the pandemic now too, everything I've seen you do has been in person. And I see the deep connections you're able to make when you do in person, when people are able to sing together, which we know doesn't quite work as well on Zoom, right? When all of these things, and I can't even begin to imagine the impact that COVID has had on your professional work. I know COVID has had a deep impact on everyone, really, but on your professional work, I can't even imagine the impact that the COVID world has had.
So I'll say that it is so true that I miss singing in person with people, like with my entire being. And I think the longer this goes on, the more strong that yearning has become, especially since all of the conferences that we usually get together, all of us song leaders, songwriters, those have all moved online. And there's definitely been a feeling of loss. But I also really value the community and the connections that we're able to create when we're on Zoom. Like, I was really surprised about a year ago already now, like Monday, things are happening. Tuesday, oh no, it's getting worse. I think by Wednesday of that week, I realized that my weekend gig was canceled and that everything was going to be canceled for the next month or two. That's what we thought. It was a month or two. And I didn't really even think about it. I put out online, I scheduled, I'm like, I'm going to do Shacharit live from my Facebook page on Thursday morning, and I really hope you'll join me. And part of that, at least a lot of that, was because that's what I needed. I need to be in a community with people, and even just seeing people's names pop up or hearing their comments, even though I couldn't hear their voices, being present with people is so powerful for me. And I find my flow really when I'm holding space for people, when I'm able to hold that sacred container where people can open their hearts or just be still, whatever they need in that particular moment. And we can still do that over Zoom. We're talking now about how do we do hybrid learning? What does it mean to go back to in person when singing is discouraged, when we're wearing our masks? And singing is a great way of spreading COVID, unfortunately. But that prayer itself is COVID safe because it happens in here. And all of the things that we're doing, all of the singing, all of the liturgy, all of the outside pieces are trying to help us get to an inner state. And so it might be more difficult or different to try to achieve that inner state or that inner heart opening without of the outside pieces, but it is possible.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That even goes beyond your professional work, right? I mean, that's just a beautiful way to approach, such these difficult times for everyone. So thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Tell me about your Jewish life.
My Jewish life, like starting from the kiddo place.
Your story, right? This is the great thing with your storytellers. You can start the story wherever you want. You can take it in any direction. You can end it whenever you want. So
right, my
own story here. Yeah,
my origin story. I feel very lucky to have grown up in the family that I did. I was raised in Memphis, Tennessee. My father was a conservative rabbi. My mother was a social worker and a Jewish educator. Who still does, sings beautifully, loved music. And I grew up in a joyful Jewish home. I talk about how I went to all of the different institutions. I went to a day school. I went to Jewish summer camp. I did youth group. I did Israel trips. I did and loved all of these things. But the thing that cultivated my Jewish neshama, my Jewish soul the most was home, was the fact that we had Shabbat dinners and we would sing songs from the bencher on Friday night until 11, 12 p.m. And we would sing and dance around, and we had Jewish books and Jewish music and Jewish games, and we would talk about these things. And synagogue was always a loving and beautiful place for me. Part of that is because I was a little diva child and I loved to perform. I just wanted to be performing for everybody all the time. When I was a kid, I knew that when I grew up, I was going to be a famous singer, dancer, actress, movie star, Broadway star, right? Just like everything, just a famous everything. I was that kid. I would put on plays with my friends. I would get up on the bima and spin around until I fell down. And I started learning how to lead services mostly because, like bima means stage, and I wanted to be up on a stage in front of everybody. But also I've been writing songs since a very young age. Singing out loud to myself became my way of processing what was going on. And I can remember singing to myself starting from ages like 3 or 4. And I know a lot of kids do that. I just never stopped. And I just kept going. And then when I got to, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, I started writing it down. I grew up in the conservative movement where we had Jewish music, but we didn't have necessarily a song leader culture. And I didn't know the identities of the people who wrote the melodies that we sang. We didn't have a handout with the names of the authors. We didn't stop and say, and this melody is written by so-and-so. It was all from Sinai. And then in the car, we had Craig Taubman and Debbie Friedman and a couple of other people on rotation. So I started writing like singer-songwritery songs, and some of them, a lot of them were about like being famous and having boyfriends, which I hadn't done when I was 12, but like that's what I heard on the radio that people wrote songs about. So I did too. I still have a binder of all of the songs I wrote in middle school. They're terrible, but I have them. Someday when I'm more secure, I'll do a concert with all my old terrible songs.
Yes. I would be honored to host that concert. I'd love to host that concert.
Oh my God. I'm not ready. It's going to take a couple more years, seriously. But there was something about Jewish practice that drew me in. I felt connected to nature. I felt connected to others, sometimes in Jewish settings and sometimes not. I didn't always feel like those were the same. I had a very strong moral compass. I thought there was a right and that there was a wrong, and that God wanted me to do the right thing and was counting on me to do the right thing. And I didn't want to let God down. As I grew older and kind of learned that the world was more complicated than that, it got a little more difficult to hold on to that idea. My father passed away young when I was 18, after complications at the end of his life. And I couldn't hold on to that either. And by that point, I had given up my dreams of being a famous so-and-so, and I wanted to be a rabbi. Through which was the dream for many years. Through college, I kept wrestling with all of these things, wrestling with what is my relationship with God and spirituality and Torah after this loss? Do I want to be a leader? I didn't get into any a cappella groups, so I didn't think I could sing anymore. Like all of those things were kind of coming to a head. And a couple of experiences changed my life. I went to my first New Cage conference. I was invited to share. Someone I had met years before remembered I wrote Jewish music and invited me to share when I wasn't planning on doing anything with my music professionally. And I saw that being a Jewish educator was a career path and that there was an incredible community there. And then the next summer, I went to my first Havana Shira, which is a Jewish song leading gathering in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin at Osrui. And that showed me that song leader and that using music to do teaching and facilitating and sacred space creation is a job that you can have. And so that's the path I went on. I know that was the very long version and it could have been longer, but that I'll end it there.
Wow, that's incredibly rich. Thank you for sharing all of that. One quick connection point. I didn't either remember or realize you were born in Tennessee. I think you are the third guest of mine who's from Tennessee. My first guest, Ellie Gettinger. She's from outside the Knoxville area, I believe. I hope I'm getting that right. And one of my later guests, Rabbi Phil Reiner, I don't know if you've come in contact with him. He's also from the kind of greater Knoxville area as well. So you're my third Tennessee-born guest so far.
Amazing. Well, I will say I was not born in Memphis. I was born at Evanston Hospital in Evanston, Illinois, while my dad was the assistant rabbi in Highland Park. But I only lived in Chicago for 6 weeks.
Gotcha.
So it's definitely raised in Memphis. But yeah, so you're covering the other side of the state. So
yeah, that's okay. We'll cover Tennessee, but it's just remarkable that
it's great.
A high percentage of all of my guests are coming from Tennessee. So yeah, thank you for sharing your journey. And it's a remarkable path from Jewish connection to stage. And I was actually just talking with my son. I think it was 2 days ago or yesterday, where actually it was a couple days ago after I was finishing Shabbat services on Zoom. He said to me, like, being a rabbi is kind of like being an actor, isn't it? And I said, well, to some degree, like one similarity, and you can tell me please how you feel with this, if you resonate or if you have a different experience. But I feel like when you're an actor, you're trying your best to pretend to be feeling something and doing something, right? And the great actors are the ones who can really get into character, and it's as if those are the real emotions. I feel like being a rabbi, I can't really just pretend. I can't pretend to be enjoying services or liking Judaism if it's going to be sincere. That being said, you're on a bima, which is literally a stage. So being a rabbi, being a cantor, being a song leader, being all these things, you are kind of acting, but hopefully there's something sincere and passionate about it. So that was one quick thought. I don't know how that connects with you.
It's interesting. In a lot of the places I work and I hear people say like prayer leadership can't be performative or it shouldn't be performative. The thing is, in a sense, it's all performative. The question is to what ends, is this a TV show that we're watching? Or sometimes I like to think of tefillah like immersive theater, like really good immersive theater. Like you're bringing people on a journey through a particular set of emotions and feelings and actions. We don't actually have any control over whether people feel those things. We can just make the conditions the most conducive for them to have that experience. So maybe we're like an MC through an immersive theater production. I was doing a session once and someone said, well, if we can't control what people feel, then what's the point of all of this? And I thought, well, think of a party planner. Like the people say, we're celebrating our wedding. We want the vibe to be fun and we want there to be joy and we want it to celebrate the two of us. Now, you can't force everyone to feel joyous at a party, but the party planner still takes that goal and plans a party based on that goal. They're not going to get everyone to have fun. They don't know what's happened to each individual person, but it doesn't stop there from being a job that is party planner or a job that is MC or a job that is DJ, right? We're trying to create the conditions that are the most conducive for people to have an experience. And I think that's what we do as prayer leaders also.
I love that. I am stealing that phrase, immersive theater. I will give you credit for giving it to me. Yeah, no, that is beautiful because I've always felt that tension, right? That on the one hand, I want to create an experience for other people. On the other hand, I'm acutely aware that I'm the one, creating that experience. And it's almost felt kind of binary to me that sometimes I'm either doing it for me in a way that I enjoy, sometimes I'm doing it for others. But I love the idea of immersive theater because then the person on the bima is a participant with everyone else. They might have a more focused role in trying to create an atmosphere and environment. I love that immersive theater because that puts everyone in the play together.
Yeah, we're all in it together. And I think there's also one of the challenging things about Jewish prayer is that we sing and we use a liturgical tradition of words that other people wrote. That's the other reason it feels like theater to me, in that the words or immersive theater or good poetry or whatever it might be, we're using other people's words to try to catalyze within ourselves a particular reaction, a particular heart openingness. Now, it doesn't mean that we parrot the words back or that we must say the words as if we totally believe them or understand them, but that we are inspired by them or take them or think, who was the person that wrote this? What happened in their lives? I think we get so caught up with needing to take the prayers literally, or saying them ends up being like a sign off on everything that it's saying, instead of thinking of this as our guidebook, our map, that there's so many gems in the liturgy that can help us think about our lives in different ways.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I know people often ask, it's like, I don't connect with prayer. So what do I do? And yeah. So you talked a little bit about the path of going into the rabbinate and then maybe stepping away from that, partly because of your father's passing and some of the questions. I imagine you feel fulfilled in your Jewish world, right? Doing everything you're doing. Do you feel like there's still something missing? Do you love what you're doing? Is this a never go back kind of thing?
It's so interesting. I think there are a couple of questions. I think the question about like continuing my education is like, I always want to keep learning. I always want to keep growing. I don't know if academia is necessarily the best way for me to do that. I've always learned the most on the job. Even when I was in grad school, after a year of that, I took a full-time job and continued to learn. And those two things in tandem really helped me grow. There's always been the question of titles in my mind. Do I need the title of rabbi to be taken seriously, to have a seat at the proverbial table, whatever that might be? At a certain point, I was this close to going to cantorial school. I applied, I got in. In the end, I decided not to go. There are a lot of different kind of interweaving thoughts about why I decided not to go that route. Part of it is because if I believe, as I do, that Jewish education is an important and beautiful path and that Jewish educators deserve to be respected and honored, then saying, and now I'm going to get a title just so that I can be respected and honored. How about let's raise the bar for Jewish educators and help us all get that respect and honor. That's one. I think the other thing is that even though I went to the Davidson school, it itself is pluralistic. And I like the idea that I can be a bridge builder between movements and share and exchange in different ideas, and that I can still have a Jewish practice that works for me in any given moment. I don't have to be anyone's halachic authority. Not that that's what rabbis do these days, but to me, that is definitely still a big part of being a rabbi. And that wasn't the part that really spoke to me. In terms of whether I'm fulfilled, I think a lot about what I'm doing with my career, and with what I really do feel is these particular gifts. Everyone's given particular gifts, and the question is like, what do we do with that? How do we use those gifts to help and support and uplift ourselves in the world? Every year I have an existential crisis about it, and I think that I keep getting closer to the bullseye. I'm working on something right now. It's very amorphous, so I don't know how much I can talk about it, but about prayer and connecting to prayer and prayer education, and what are our real goals with prayer. And tefillah in Hebrew is this dual nature of both liturgy and prayer. What does that mean? Something is happening. Something is going on. In general, I'm very happy and feel very blessed to do what I'm doing. But I think there are other ways to kind of share and catalyze and make things more meaningful for more people, as it said in my bio.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I would love to hear more as this develops. This intersection between prayer and people and experiences and all of that. I think it's sorely needed, right? The rabbis a couple thousand years ago essentially had to redefine prayer after the Second Temple was destroyed, right? So they went from bringing an animal to the priest to saying words, right? So they radically redefined prayer. And I've been wondering for a while, and I love hearing you say it, talk about it too. That I wonder if. I don't know how radical it has to be. Maybe it does need to be radical, but if we kind of need to redefine the prayer experience as well, and or at least create different avenues for a meaningful prayer experience.
Yes, I think that there is so much wisdom in the Siddur, but it's almost as if that wisdom is under lock and key for a variety of reasons. It's in a language that most of us don't speak. I find the translations of most Siddurim to be difficult to connect to, sterile in some ways. The God language is kind of out of date with the way that at least I personally often relate to the Holy One, and that can be a barrier. Also, the fact that even unless you're in like a particular kind of service, you're doing so many prayers at once. And the whole experience can be very powerful and emotionally moving, but it doesn't necessarily give you the time to unpack and dig deeply into one piece of liturgy, ask questions of it, engage with it, question it, pick up the different gems and hold them to the light and be like, what do I see? If I look at the world through this prayer, what does the world look like? Those kinds of questions. So I'm hoping to create spaces and opportunities for people to be able to do that deep study of prayer. And I'm also very interested in the way people teach prayer and the way that prayer is taught. We have in our country right now, in general, this kind of spiritual crisis where maladies of the soul, as it sometimes is said, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation is going up, while spiritual tradition is going down. And I learned a lot of this by the book, The Spiritual Child, and the author of that book, Dr. Miller, who I just did a program with, which is why it's really on my mind. But she says that there is nothing that fights against those maladies more than having a strong spiritual core. And part of having strong spiritual core is having a foundation of belief or understanding that reminds you that you are connected to something greater than yourself, that you have a relationship with that which is greater than yourself, that is based in love and compassion and care. It means you know that you're never alone. It means you feel safe. It means that you feel held in this world. It means that if something bad happens, that you are able to be more resilient and that you treat others with respect and care and work towards a just world. Like all of those amazing things that I want for everybody are wrapped up in this idea of having a strong spiritual core. And so often our goal in teaching tefillah is to make our kids into good synagogue going adult Jews. But we know that that is not working out as we had planned, because if it had been, our synagogues would be full, and they're not, right? We can't take it for granted that adult Jews pray the way that we think that they could or should, or the way that we have for many years, because our synagogues are not full. And what if we switch the goal of teaching tefillah? What if instead of learning how to chant such and such for your bar and bat mitzvah, the goal was to use our shared spiritual language and shared ritual practices to build within each person a strong spiritual core? The tools are there, the language is there. Gratitude, love, redemption, creation, comfort, connection. It's all in the Siddur. You know, you could study Kabbalah, you could study mysticism. Yes, please go do that. You could also open up a Siddur and kind of take it seriously or engage with it in that way. So these are the things that are on my mind these days. It's something. It's turning into something. We'll see what it turns into.
It's remarkable, and I can't, in a good way. I'm still holding on to the image that you used of like looking at tefillah or specific prayer as a gem, and like holding it up to the light, and seeing how life gets refracted through that gem, and seeing how your experience can get refracted through it, and like looking at the world through that gem of a prayer. So I love that image. So that's going to stick with me, and I'm sure I cannot wait to hear more about what you're doing.
I'll keep you posted when it's a thing.
Yeah. I also have to imagine, and I don't know if I'm being too presumptuous, but I have to imagine that since a lot of the work that you're doing is trailblazing, right? You're creating a path where you're creating an honor and respect because of the work that you're doing and who you are and how you're doing it. It's a little bit trailblazing. I have to imagine anytime something's trailblazing, it also sometimes can challenge some of the accepted standards and norms. Have you found any barriers on your way? I don't know. Has there been experiences where people have resisted, institutions, organizations, personal barriers? I just have to imagine there have to be barriers when you're doing something so potentially wonderful and disruptive at the same time.
So it's interesting. People have asked me about this in particular on my work around God language, and God teaching, which is still going to be a big part of my work through prayer. I think the God baggage that we all carry around is one of the barriers of us for entering tefillah and the liturgy and personal prayer practice. And someone once asked me, you go to all of these synagogues and you talk about God and you talk about how it's more complicated than we think. This is kind of a sidebar, but it reminds me of a story that my mom told about Rabbi Dr. Neil Gilman, who I never got to learn from. Unfortunately, he passed before I was a student at GTS, but his work in mythos and God language and, sacred fragments and all of those things really lay the groundwork for the kind of work that I get to do. But my mom tells the story of when Rabbi Gilman came to speak at, I guess it was the synagogue in Chicago, I'm not sure, wherever my father was the rabbi at the time. And he was sharing all of these things about how the difference between signs and symbols, and how the names for God are metaphors for the different ways that we interact with the divine in the world. And according to the way my mom tells it, there were murmurs, people were getting their pitchforks out, and someone stands up and says, I don't know about you, Dr. Gilman, but I don't pray to a metaphor. And then everybody starts getting upset. And then my mother grabs him off of the bima, swoops him into my father's office. And that, she ends the story with, is how I saved Rabbi Gilman's life, which is such a ridiculous thing to think about. But yeah, I guess 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, when he was talking about those things, they were potentially more radical than they are today, even though none of what I'm doing is radical. I think, in fact, going back into the Siddur, engaging seriously with liturgy in this way and connecting it to our lives, maybe that's what's radical. I feel a connection to renewal Judaism in this way, or at least the teaching of Reb Zalman, and kind of what I experienced when I was at Romamu in New York, of the radical thing we're doing is going into the liturgy. The radical thing we're doing is being fervent and talking about God and talking about mitzvot in this way that's expansive and welcoming and accessible. I feel lucky to have a lot of people that I get to do this work with. And everyone I've talked to about this has been excited about it. You know, I work with Rabbi Josh Wachowski on this stuff and Cantor Ellen Dreskin on this stuff. And we get to teach and talk about teaching prayer a lot. And every time I offer a webinar or a series at a conference about teaching tefillah, the room is absolutely full because we're all struggling, because we're being asked to teach something that for a lot of teachers, they haven't totally figured it out themselves. And sometimes we think, well, we have to have it figured out before we teach it. But what we really need to have before we teach it is passion. You know, I don't remember most facts from when I was in elementary school. What I remember are the teachers that were so passionate and excited about the material that instead of making it feel like you have to learn this, it felt, I have this amazing thing and I want to share it with you because I care about you. And it's going to help your life because it matters to me so much. We don't do that with tefillah very often because we don't have the time or the energy or the effort to dig in to what it means to us. And so we're focused on the minutia of how do I teach the Torah service instead of asking, why teach the Torah service? Why do we have a Torah service? What is the point of the ritual of a Torah service? What are these words trying to tell us? How can we take it seriously? I don't know if we want to go in this road, but just a lot of different thoughts about the goal of prayer teaching and how in order to, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel Wright talks about text people, that we have to be text people. We are the living embodiment, the dugma, the example of what we want our students to find and achieve and see. If we are able to have honest conversations about prayer, what it is, what it could be, how it plays into our lives, we can help our students do that too in a way that like sitting down and reading the Aleinu word for word might not.
Yeah, that's powerful because especially if you do think of tefillah as prayer as the next step after sacrifices, right? We know that sacrifices were heavily ritualized. It's like you get the Lego manual and you have to do it piece by piece by piece in the exact right order. And in many ways, that's what prayer has become. And I think you're opening up the possibility that prayer doesn't necessarily have to be so defined and so prescriptive and so absolute this, that it can be an immersive experience. It can be a personal experience. It can be an intimate. It can be a difficult experience. And that sharing our engagements, our passion, and our struggles with prayer might bring people in a much different way from just going through the table of contents and doing pages 1 through 58.
Right. And it's interesting what you said about the fact that prayer emerged after that form of worship of sacrifice had ended. Besides a few things that were mandated, like the Shema and pieces of the Amidah, everything else was extemporaneous for a really long time. Everything else was, what is the leader feeling? How is someone responding to the pain and the joy of being a human being, right? In this particular moment, what do I feel? What do I want to share out to that which is greater than me in the universe? And, I heard someone in another town did a beautiful way of doing that. So now I'm going to say that, but then I'm going to add my own thing. And it developed, but it's kind of like the Shulchan Aruch, right? When you write it all down, when the game stops being played, then we hold on to the form instead of holding on to the meaning and the ideas behind it. So saying that, on the one hand, we're going to engage with the liturgy and think about, well, who are the people that wrote this? Not because we need to know their names historically, but because we can remember that prayers were written by people who lived in the world just like we did and who had struggles and questions that were very similar to our own, that we can take the liturgy on its own merit and learn from the wisdom of the Siddur on the one hand. And on the other hand, we can let that bring us back to, if not extemporaneous prayer, which I know is really difficult for people. Maybe we can get there. It's a goal of mine and a lot of other folks, to at least open our hearts to that feeling of connection, that openness to hope, that openness to oneness and the themes of our Siddur, and feel them in us for ourselves. Sometimes I think of it as the words of the Siddur are our input and prayer is the output. The words aren't the output. The output of prayer is the feeling that we bring to it, the intention we bring to it, our own thoughts, our own words, even just being present. But it's very possible to read the words of the Siddur and not be praying. It's incredibly possible. But it's also possible to read the words of Siddur and be praying if we think of that in that dual way.
Yeah, you're bringing up a lot of beautiful points, and there's a lot, and they connect authentically too, right? Because if you look at the Torah, right, if you look at the Tanakh, if you look at the Bible, there's no example of reading prayers out of a prayer book. Every single prayer is extemporaneous and impromptu, right? When Eliezer needs to find a wife for Isaac, he just offers a heartfelt prayer at the well, right? When Miriam is stricken with this skin disease, we often call it leprosy, but it's close enough, right? When Miriam is stricken with this skin disease, Moses says, El na refanala, dear God, please heal her. Like 5 impromptu words. Chana praying, which we recite at the Haftarah at Rosh Hashanah. These are all impromptu. So essentially, rather than being radical, it sounds like what you're doing is returning us to our prayer roots.
Yeah, I think the radical part about it is the way that theology has morphed and changed for a lot of people. You know, when I work with middle school and high schoolers, sometimes if we're talking about prayer and God, I'll ask if they've ever looked around a synagogue and thought, do all these people really believe this stuff? Stuff being like a word I might use other language if I wasn't with those kids. And they all raise their hands. Yeah. If we take it at face value, which in Judaism, I don't think we take anything at the face value. That's one of the things I love about being Jewish. We midrash the hell out of everything, right? We find layers and layers of meaning in every single ritual we do, big or small. Every single word, every single letter has that kind of meaning. But we don't often do that with prayer. We think we have to take it at face value, or at least we don't do it for God. So like, for example, I know I keep going off on tangents, so you can bring me back if you need, but like in the Psalms of Kabul at Shabbat, we say like, Ya'alo Sadai V'chol Asher Bo, Aziranu Kolatse Ya'ar, the trees in the fields are having a dance party. Great. I know that that's not literal. It's poetry. Poetry is meant to be getting at an experience of the world that words can't express, but in words, right? Because it's what we have and we're trying. So what does it mean to be part of a world where everything is joining in this dance and when I'm a part of that dance? Then in the next psalm, it says, Adonai malach tegel haaretz, and I recognized in me that something in myself would shut down. God is the king over all the earth. And I'd think, no, God is not. As if that's any less poetry than the poetry we just read about the dancing trees and the fields. And then if I'm able to kind of put aside my God baggage for a moment and say, what is this telling me about the world as it is, or the world that we want it to be, the world that the psalmist wants it to be? It says a couple lines later, right? What is the nature of this Adonai as malach, Adonai as king? Tzedek u'mishpat mechon kiso. Justice and righteousness are the base of God's throne. What an incredible image that is, to say that there is something steady and stable in the world, and God's throne in this poetic image is not rubies or diamonds or gold or like the heads of his enemies or what have you. It is the concepts of justice and righteousness, right? That is a desire for a world, or a knowledge that the world has the capacity to be built on these values and that we have access to those values. But if we take it, if our mind stops at Adonai malach, no, God's not, we don't give ourselves permission to enter into those images and ideas of God. That is all to say that one of the challenges of extemporaneous prayer is if I think I have to believe in Zeus or Santa Claus as God, you know, and that's what prayer is asking sky God for candy and favors, as I sometimes say, or, you know, I'll say in a workshop with middle schoolers, like, have you ever thought that God must have really low self-esteem, and that's why God needs to say that God is so great all the time? Yes, if you take it at face value, that's what it is. But what does it mean to dig into these themes of gratitude and awe and wonder and our response to being human in this ridiculous world? We get into the depths of what prayer actually is. We need to take those ideas about God seriously and talk about God in a way that we don't always do. It was a very long-winded answer to your question, but I hope it helped.
I love it. You know, and here's what I was thinking as you were talking, that if we really do look at God as this fountain of justice in the world, of course the trees are going to be dancing. Right? Of course they're going to be dancing.
I
No,
love
I love it. No, look, this is one of the things that I've already found in the little bit of time we spent before, and certainly I'm finding now that the more you talk, the more I want to hear you talk, and the more questions I want to ask. So rather than saying like you're talking too much, you're not talking enough, Eliana. Please
that.
keep sharing. Yeah, I'm serious. No, if there's anything else on your platform right now that you've been thinking about, forget my agenda. I'd love to hear anything but I don't want to put you on the spot either. So, um, um, yeah, this is amazing. And, a phrase that also jumped to mind that as you were talking is that and I don't know if this is what you're trying to do or not, but this at least resonated with me is that maybe we're talking about a co-creative prayer experience where rather than the prayer book creating the prayer experience, rather than the ancient words of the rabbis from 2,000 years ago creating the prayer experience, rather than the person on the bima creating this experience, we're all trying to co-create a prayer experience, and that involves whoever is facilitating or leading, and it involves you, it involves me, it involves the people there, it involves the siddur, but everyone there has to participate in the creation, right? In other words, you can have the best prayer facilitator in the world, you can have the best translation in the world, and there's still a level of everyone there isn't really fully part of it unless they're creating it as well. So it sounds like you're talking in some ways about co-creating a prayer experience every time we pray.
I think so. When we think about, sorry, when we think about these different ideas, we are certainly co-creating it. I know that at least for myself, when we, I know that at least for myself, often as Jews, we might have jealousy for other prayer traditions, jealousy for other, when we see other folks praying or we see other kinds of worship happening. I think part of that jealousy stems from the fervor of the people that are in the room, and how much they are into it in their bodies and their spirits. I've gone to plenty of synagogues where they say our community is a singing community. I'm like, great, that's really exciting. And we get there and it's, lecha dodi li kala yalala yalala yalala. And Joey Weisenberg, who I know that you've talked to before, says it's never the melody's fault. I agree with him in a lot of extents on that. But the reason that you can sing any tune ever written and have it sound like dirge is because we're not bringing our full selves to it. And there's so many barriers. There's like the generations of Jews trying to be Protestant and trying to act right and white and like trying to be respectable and trying to keep their loudness and their joy like tucked away inside. Like we inherited that from our ancestors. Not even from our ancestors, from like the generations above us, as much as we inherited these big buildings that are often sitting empty. Like we've inherited forms that don't necessarily work for us today. And we put so much attention on the forms that we're not always able to see how there's something deep that's underneath it, and to have compassion for them at what they were trying to do, and a lot of love for our ancestors of what they were trying to do. But you get out of it what you put into it, and that's true for so many things in life, but it's definitely true for prayer.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the story from the Torah of Moses with Eldad and Medad, right? The story where Moses leaves camp in these two, as far as I know, they're otherwise random Israelites, right? I don't really remember the full backstory. I don't think they have the huge backstory of the Torah, but they're basically prophesying in camp. And then the elders go back to Moses and say, look at what they're doing when you're gone. They're kind of like usurping your role. And Moses' response, right? If only everyone were to do that. So that kind of jumped in my head that if only we were all like Eldad and Medad and we just felt comfortable blasting out the tunes, getting up, singing and dancing, clapping, changing, improvising, co-creating, rather than feeling like we had to stay in line.
Right. As long as we're able to keep a sense of humility and service about it, right? That one of the Hebrew word for prayer is avodah. Worship is in service of something larger than ourselves. I think I've seen not sometimes in the Jewish space, but also in other kind of spiritual spaces, if someone rises to the level of, guru or charismatic leader, it can be very easy for that sort of prayer and feeling of control over the situation to evolve into a pride or an arrogance. I think that's one of the reasons that we have the Siddur and Torah, is to remind ourselves that we're part of a lineage and a heritage, and that our ancestors are praying with us every time we're there, and everything that ever happened led up to us being here. And we had very little to do with everything that ever happened. Like, here we are, and we have not just the weight, but the joy and the opportunity of carrying all of those people and things forward. And also that we're in the service of community. Rabbi, I mean, she's my rabbi, but Cantor Ellen Dreskin talks about, when we say Dalif ne miata omed, know before whom you stand, it's not just the Holy One, it's our community, it's other people, right? And if another word for prayer leader is shaliach tzibor, we're the emissary of the community, we're still of the community, right? It goes back to this immersive theater piece. We are down there with everybody. We're there in it, even though as a good prayer leader, you also, to mix metaphors, you also have to be steering the ship. Like, there needs to be a captain of the ship, but the captain of the ship isn't going to say, I know we were headed to Bermuda, but I really want to go to Alaska, right? You can't do that as the captain of the ship. But what you can do is, if, and I don't know much about ships, but if like an iceberg comes or a block comes or there's another ship, you move, you swerve, you make changes, you make additions, you have people co-pilot with you. But you're still probably going to go to Bermuda because that's what everybody is on the boat for. I know I mix metaphors a lot, but I've been to some prayer places where they say, we want it to be so unperformative that we're not really going to have a direction. Or someone has to know where they're going, have to be open enough for feedback and to realize that they're praying. So, right, it's this balance between, it's chesed and gevura. It's these balances between holding on and letting go, all of those different things that come together.
This is remarkable. Yeah, this is just a remarkable reimagining of what, and maybe it shouldn't be a reimagining. Maybe this is what it always kind of should have been for a long time. And but I love how you are simultaneously getting us to think about something in an incredibly, incredibly different way, but still grounding us in the tradition, right? It kind of reminds me of that Talmudic teaching that everyone has a note in each of their pockets, in one that says that the world was created for my benefit, and the other one that says that I'm nothing but dust and ashes, right? That somebody has to be steering the ship, but they're steering the ship for everybody on there. You're not, this isn't kayaking where you're on a solo adventure. You can go wherever you want. I love it. And everyone on the boat has to participate too. People have to pick up oars and paddles and row or help out. If it's a storm, you got to help with the mast and everything. I know nothing about ships either. I'm making it all up, but hopefully it sounds good enough, right? But people have to participate too. So no, this is a beautiful way to encompass a prayer experience. And I think it'll energize people and galvanize people to want to pray.
I hope so. My goal isn't ever, I don't think, to get more people to pray. I talk, when I do presentations about prayer education, one of the things I say is have the conversation with your ed director, your lay leaders, hopefully even your clergy if they want to get in on it. Why do you pray? What is the point? The answer is not because we're a synagogue. Again, that answer, we can't take that for granted anymore, right? We just can't. So what is the point of your prayer? Why are you doing it? And then use that answer to come up with your set of whys, your set of guiding principles for prayer. And if what you decide out of that conversation is that you're spending too much time doing tefillah in your very limited prayer, day of school, great, do less of it, as long as you are intentional about what you're doing and why you're doing it. What I think is important about this is the fact of building a strong spiritual core. And I desire a world of justice and equity and peace, not only where we all have inner resilience, but where we've created the systems to take care of each other in a way that we're really seeing now that we don't have, and that we can't take that for granted at all. And I think that Jewish prayer practice in particular has incredibly potent language for that, that's accessible and meaningful for everybody. For example, I'll show you, I've been looking for a new notebook. And of course, I don't know, my notebook chooses me. So I was looking at stores and I went to Target and I saw this notebook. And it says, we're all on the same team with the world. And I love this so much, and it reminded me of the way I think about the Shema, honestly. So here we'll get into this is where Eliana's brain is at these days. So in the Shema, we say Yod He Vav He Echad. That's the end. This is the statement of our people, not even a prayer, just a statement of understanding of the world. And if we translate Yod He Vav He as we can, because it's the root as being, as is, all that is one. It's not a question. It's a statement of fundamental interconnectivity, which we know is real. And I think coronavirus has shown this even more so. Borders are something that we made up. Divisions between people are things that we created. We made them up. So much that we think is set in stone is not set in stone. We actually have the capacity to help people as nations, as groups, as individuals. Like if we decide to, once we put our values in order, we actually can decide to do more things than we want. So it's a statement of the truth, but we look around and we see that it's not the truth as we are living it. Right? If we all lived according to Yod He Vav He Echad, or according to we're all on the same team, the world would be an incredibly different place. And that's why I think, I was confused at the end of the Aleinu. It says, Bayom Hahu Yihiyeh, Yod He Vav He Echad Ushmo Echad. On that day, all that is will be one and be named one. Well, how can it be if we say as a statement Yod He Vav He Echad as a truth for right now, but we're also saying on that day, on the day of ultimate truth and justice and love, on that day, Yod He Vav He will be one. It's because if we actually took it seriously and we lived Yod He Vav He Echad and we acted Yod He Vav He Echad and we voted Yod He Vav He Echad, we spent our money Yod He Vav He Echad and we treated ourselves and each other that way, we would get to that day immediately, right? That's what we need for Bayom Hahu, is to live out that fundamental truth of interconnectedness. But there's so many forces that are trying to keep us apart, that try to get us to forget that we're connected. Because, it doesn't make anybody any money for us to help each other. Honestly, I think part of my quote unquote, radical, it's not even radical politics. I think that we have a responsibility to each other. That's the basis. And the Shema is the basis for that. And the Aleinu is the dream of that. On that day, not only will it be the truth, but we'll name it as truth. Ushmo Echad. We'll be able to talk about it. We'll name it because we'll see it in the world. It's a little rant for you, little notebook-based rant.
I love it. I love it. That's such a beautiful way to end, talking about oneness, and that's really the dream, right? I love it. So let me ask you one final question. I'm a Jew, and or I'm a prayer leader, and or a community leader, or a synagogue. This all seems scary, intimidating, too much, crazy. I'm worried about what the person sitting next to me is going to think. What advice are you going to give me, either as a Jew who's just who feels inhibited to try to explore this, or perhaps as a community leader or a board member who feels unsettled trying to introduce this to a community? What would your advice be?
I think at a base level, there is something in each human being that desires to call out and connect to that which is greater than themselves, however we want to define it. Prayer is our response to that piece of the universe. I would go simple and share that, according to writer Anne Lamott, there are 3 types of fundamental human prayers: wow, thanks, and help. And I think that thanks is the easiest one. So I would just say, take a deep breath. You can think of the things that you're grateful for in the abstract, but you can also allow a feeling of gratitude to enter your heart for the present moment, for the next breath, for the body that you're in, for the space that you're walking in. How does it feel to respond to the universe, to the gifts that we've been given from a position of gratitude? It's reflected in the Siddur everywhere, especially in the morning prayers that are setting us up for the day. But if we can kind of put that aside for a second and just say, let's be in a moment of gratitude, can we let that lead us to taking fewer things for granted? Can we let that lead us to living lives of love and of openness, just from that one seed, that one thought of gratitude?
That's beautiful. Thank you. So let me start to practice that and express my gratitude. Thank you again so much for coming, for sharing, for once again serving as a teacher and a role model for me. I've learned so much just from the couple of weeks we shared at camp and from our conversations before camp. I remember our first conversation, I was on my way driving to Connecticut for staff week, and that's when we had our first conversation. And I continue to learn so much from you. And you're just such a wonderful person to sit with and talk with and be with. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your journey and your presence with us. You can't see them, but Shara on Facebook just wrote a note. Beautiful conversation. Thanks for the work you're doing, Eliana. So,
oh, so sweet. Thank you.
It's a live comment right now. So thank you very much again. And once again, soon, maybe the next 6 months, maybe the next year or two, we're going to have the live debut of Eliana's middle school and high school and elementary school songs. So that's coming here. Another friend, Jonathan Blatter, is also writing. Great learning experience. So thank you for all of these. And we look forward to you debuting all of those wonderful albums. And if anyone, by the way, is part of a synagogue or a prayer community or any kind of community, they can reach out to you, right? This is what you do.
Absolutely. This is what I do, and I'm hoping to do more of it. So please, you can contact me through my website, elianalight.com. It's probably the easiest way, but as you can tell, I could talk about this a lot, and I care about it a lot. So please be in touch.
Wonderful. And if you don't remember her email, just IM me or message me, and I will put you in touch. She, as you can hear, she's really wonderful and remarkable. So thank you very, very much, Eliana. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. Thank you for having me.